in listen-only mode.
Good morning. This is Bill Baker at Firestorm. Got a little technical difficulty here. Miss Karen, I'm making you the presenter. So if you could go ahead and show your screen and we will get going. Today we're going to be discussing part of the Crisis Coach webinar series, the Containment Myth. We're talking about how misinformation can mess things up for an organization. We're pleased to have the Virginia Association of Independent Schools as the co-sponsor and host of this webinar series. If you want to watch previous webinars, this is the fourth in this year's series, you can go to firestorm.com and you can register for past webinars and you can register for future ones as well. We'd also like you to become our friend. On Facebook, we're known as Firestorm Solutions. Our Twitter, if you want to follow us, is Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag for the session. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. We've got Blair coming on. Let's see if we can get him in. Firestorm empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We'd like to remind you that the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this word product should be read in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, this information should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. Firestorm is delighted to have a long, ongoing relationship with the Virginia Association of Independent Schools. As I mentioned, this is the fourth in the 2016 series of the Crisis Coach webinars. There is a 2015 series as well that you can go and watch the past webinars at Firestorm.
Ryan, did you speak a little bit to the VAIS mission?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, my name is Ryan Mercer. I'm the Firestorm Principal located in Maryland. So for everyone in Virginia on the phone call, I am the closest Firestorm representative to you, so I'll be following up after the phone call. Unfortunately, Kim Failing couldn't join us from the Virginia Association. So, again, we're very happy to have you all. This is the fourth in the series. I think we have 7 different presentations recorded for you all to watch and enjoy, and with each of the recordings we also have a brief that you can download that explains and you can distribute to your faculty or whoever you see fit. But we are here to be your resource and ally as you are developing your preparedness program at your school. I'll be following up with everyone afterwards and we can chat about some opportunities that we are offering to Virginia Association school members free of charge, so definitely want to take advantage of that. So I think I'm going to kick it over to Blair, who is another Firestorm principal. Very happy to introduce him. He's a great friend who is going to be moving through this presentation for us. He's got lots of really great information. So Blair, over to you, and thank you for joining us.
I'm not sure if Blair is able to connect just yet. He's in the session, but I think he was having some difficulty with his phone. So we'll go ahead and jump in, and hopefully we'll be able to pull Blair in as quickly as possible. I wanted to tee this up prior to Blair coming in. My name is Karen Masullo. I'm the Chief Intelligence Officer for Firestorm and the EVP Predictive Intelligence. And I had a situation yesterday that I wanted to talk to you about a little bit. We do some monitoring for a very large school system in the Chicago area. And yesterday they had a temporary lockdown situation. And these things happen. There was a disturbance at the school. Their procedures and plans and processes worked. Everyone was managed. Within 10 minutes, the situation was over, and everybody was really happy. The police were involved, but it was resolved very quickly. However, about 2 hours later on social media, you would have thought Godzilla had attacked the school, because the misinformation that came out about what had happened was really creative. So we understand that when we're dealing with schools, school children, concerned parents, and this particular school system has 22 schools and very active parent groups on Facebook. Again, we monitor all of that. But they were very active in creating the scenario that may have happened. So I want to let you know that. Hi, Blair. How are you? We're so happy to see you.
Hey, I'm fine. I'm fine. Thank you very much for your patience.
Well, we just finished
I do
up a
apologize. Had some technical difficulty trying to get into the line, get the sound.
Great. You sound great. We just finished up a little story. We're on the fabulous quote that you sent slide. So take it away.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. And again, I do apologize for being a few minutes tardy here. I had some technical problems getting in. As Karen was saying, the quote is apropos given today's topic. We're not going to have our conversation in French, though. The bonjour is just a little commentary. As I was putting the slide together, I kept being reminded of a commercial that I used to hear. I thought was very funny, and and I'm sure most of you have heard it. It's the one where two young people are talking on the street, and the gentleman asks the lady, "Where did you hear that?" And the comment is, "On the internet." And his comment is, "Where did you, and you believe it?" And her response is, "Yes. You can't put anything on the internet that is not true." And of course, where did you hear it? Well, heard it on the internet, and that's when the French model shows up. So as we go through this process today, keep it in the back of your mind, is that there's a lot of great information on the internet. There's a lot of great ways to use the tool, but there is also a lot of misinformation, and that's what we're going to spend our time talking today. And so, Karen, one other thing, I've just I can't see the slides now. I don't know if somebody is.
You've got the screen.
Blair, I gave you control so you can show the slide deck and drive it.
Okay.
So if you'll open the slide deck.
I can open it.
So minimize your mail, open your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It's
no problem. Go to slideshow mode and we'll be all set.
There we go.
Beautiful.
There we go. I'll skip through a few of these, and we'll get ourselves going. There we are.
Okay, you're the man. You got it.
I've got it. Okay, thank you. And again, excuse me for the technical difficulties here. As I was saying, keep in mind that the commentary that I just shared with the quote and the commercial. I think as we go through this, you'll get a good understanding of the kind of things we want to share. And generally, the whole idea about misinformation really comes back to its impacts on you. And you know, as the slide depicts, it is a magnet. It's a magnet for collecting of wrong impressions. And the key here is that once it is attached, it's very, very hard to remove the kind of impressions. The rumors can start very subtly. And unfortunately, bad news gets the headlines, and good news is hard to sell. And there's a term, if you've heard a few of our presentations in the past, generally that if you're explaining, you're losing. And underneath our presentation today, you'll hear that commentary coming through that this is about keeping you in control, even as those impacts start to increase in the time of crisis or an event. It doesn't always have to be just a crisis. And the funny thing about misinformation is, regardless of the truth, people believe it. On the slide, there's a couple of examples of things that seem to be still rolling around and permeating the internet, that there's been much information presented that they aren't true. You know, given the elections going on today, I thought the first one was apropos, and that there's still people that believe that this is true, even though the birth certificate has been shown. And regardless of the information, Jade Helm, for those that don't know about it, was a military exercise. It was just that, a military exercise, but a lot of misinformation about attacks on our country, planning on you know, martial law, and continued to bubble up. And the 1% tip is just something that was local here, is that, again, all over the internet, that somebody gave a waitress a 1% tip on a $133 bill, and again, not true. And the key is that misinformation is sticky. It stays, no matter how much you can present against it, how many things and how many points you can bring up around it. It still seems that people will believe, well, what they want to, and if you can provide enough information to support it subtly, it will stay, and it can be very sticky. And the reason it sort of becomes important to you is that the collateral damage can be devastating, and it really centers around trust, and the trust in your product, your school, your environment. That trust can be eroded very, very quickly. And your brand is what's particularly important to you. And as we talk through the process today, I want to keep that impression that your ability to stop misinformation early, to gain control of it, and then gain control of the impacts it can provide, is what's truly going to be able to provide you and help protect your brand and your trust in your school. Things like honesty, integrity, your ability to meet your students' needs, your parents' needs, your family's needs, are all critical components in that trust factor. And unfortunately, that emotion, and it is an emotion, can be easily eroded. Early in my career, I did a lot of sales, and there was something I was taught early on, and it's kind of an old saying, that people like to buy products from people, you know, they like. And if they don't like you, they won't buy from you. But over the years, I've kind of seen that change, and it's really more, should be reframed as people like to buy from people they trust. Even if they like you, and but they don't trust who you are or what you're presenting, it's very, very hard for them to work with you. And that little misinformation, that information that can be, you know, that can be out on the internet, can easily erode that trust. And as we go through this process, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can gain control of it. And I like the saying that it's like an eraser. Each mistake you make, it gets smaller and smaller. And during my research in this, I found actually it was a denial of service study, and it was interesting when the respondents talked about, you know, their service provider having been attacked and having their service denied. More than 50% of them said that it was the loss of trust in the business that was the biggest concern, followed by loss of revenue. So even that loss of trust is still, in some cases, more important than loss of revenue. So it's an attribute that you have in your school and what you present, and you have to be able to protect it as we go through this process. And protecting it is what we really want to spend our time on. That brand, that service that you provide. It's an intangible asset, and it's very, very precious. And there's many reasons it can be damaged. You know, not addressing your family needs, not addressing students' needs, understanding change, not understanding fully changes in the environment and responding to them quickly. But the secret is simply that if you can take that intangible asset that you have and keep that brand trust and protect it, it puts you in a position where you're a leader in the market. You're a leader within your environment. You attract better talent. You keep your student base. You keep your families coming back, and it sets up competitive barriers. So it's not only just you want to protect the negative side of it. There's a positive side and benefits to you in the school that really shine through with growing that brand and that trust. And unfortunately, little bits of information, issues on the web, commentary that's not correct can easily start to erode it. And let's hope there's not too many are like this little guy on the slide. Are you the last to know? And this is really the key to understanding this environment. You have to be, as I mentioned, you have to be very vigilant in protecting that brand and protecting that trust. But the key is that when you look at your environment, are there barriers to understanding what's going on? Information is coming to you as administration, as if you put yourself in that, you know, I can imagine putting myself in that shoes. The amount of information coming at you must be tremendous. The teachers, just the staff around any school. There's a lot of data coming at you from all different directions. But unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers to it. Too much, too fast. And one of the things that here we at Firestorm work on is being able to take that information and put some insight behind it. Because if you're the last to know, things can happen and escalate very quickly in your environment without having the information, but more importantly, the insight to be able to turn it to intelligence. Because if you have to make decisions, making them on information is critical, but without having some insight, some experience, some background, some context to it, it doesn't translate into intelligence is where you need to be able to make the decisions on. You don't want to be the last to know. You want to break down those barriers to that information flow, but at the same time, you have to be able to interpret the information, to be able to place it where it can do some good for you. You know, and one thing about a school environment, the parents present you and have an expectation that when they hand their child over to you, that they're going to get them back in the same condition as they sent them to you. Hopefully a little bit smarter, but at least it definitely in that same condition. And that's puts you in a position where you have to be able to say, I have to understand what's happening in my environment. I have to be able to collect that information. But more importantly, I have to have some experience and insight and expertise to apply to it so I can draw intelligence out of it so I can make decisions. If there's barriers, if your students have barriers to providing you with insight, then you won't know what's going on. We deal a lot, we help many schools with anonymous reporting systems, for example. Students being comfortable enough that they can share information, and that's one of the big things. If you can tap into that body of knowledge and being able to collect that information, whether electronically through some anonymous reporting system or even something as simple as a suggestion box where people can put notes in. If they see something, they can say something. That's a term we're all familiar with, and it's a term we're all comfortable with, but we also have to give the students a tool and a process so that they can provide that insight to you. You can collect the information with that insight. You can then respond. And if they don't trust the administration, or there's no mechanism for them to do it, it can be very hard to collect the data. So something as simple as an anonymous reporting system increases your intelligence around your campus environment significantly. And as I said, there's very complex systems that can be part of your administration systems. It can be as simple as a suggestion box, but that increases your ability to collect information and breaks those barriers significantly. The next area, though, is what we call visibility vulnerability. And when you look at visibility, that's not a bad thing. Let's start at that point. Is visibility is not bad. You have marketing. You need to grow your brand. You all have websites. You probably most have Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts as part of your environment, and that shows your brand. It shows your credibility. It builds your trust, and that's a good thing. So that visibility is fine. Unfortunately, that visibility also puts you in a position of being a target. And that bad visibility is something we don't want to have. We don't want to put yourselves in a position of saying something that brings attention back to your brand and your school. You want to keep those negative comments away from you. So it's a balance going on all the time, and that's why we call it visibility vulnerability, of being in front, getting your name out, putting yourself in a position where you can present the good things about your school, but at the same time staying in control so that the negatives don't creep in. And I was thinking about this as I was putting together the slide, and I have one son in high school, left in high school, and our high school is fairly large. It's about 1,600 students, but I went on to the high school's website, and I looked at a great website, and then I just counted up the clubs. There was 58 different clubs at this school, some very large, and obviously some very small. You combine that with maybe a dozen, maybe a little less, sports teams, football, hockey, track, those kinds of things. And when I went through, I started counting Facebook pages and web pages, and some of those clubs, not all of them obviously, but some of those clubs all have Facebook page. I know my son's involved with track, and that's the way they communicate. They have a Facebook page, but the reality is it's branded with the high school's name, and even though the kids run it and they use it as a communication tool and post a lot of great information on it, it still reflects back at the school. So if you sit in your school and think how many of our clubs have websites, how many of our clubs may have Facebook pages or Twitter accounts, again, there's a positive side to all of that, but there's also that vulnerability of what are they saying, how does that reflect on the school. So again, something to think about, that there's that balance going on between the two. And what I want to talk about as we go through this is helping you protect and understand, and some tools to help you work through that balance. Now, on the screen you should be seeing just a set of dots, and really you kind of think of these as schools that are out there. You're out in the middle of there. You're one of those dots, and it's fine. On the positive side of visibility, you want to get your name out, you want to be there, and you want people to see it, and you want to use it as your tools as a way to get your information out into the marketplace. But the reality is that if something happens and information starts to creep out, you can your visibility increases very quickly, and you should probably see a little red dot there. And all of a sudden, as a crisis occurs or some event occurs in your school, you become more visible very quickly. You stand out very quickly. And there's a potential for parents, families, other stakeholders, boards and boards of trustees to see you. And as time goes on, you want to continue to try to reduce the visibility, but as you can see that dot growing, it can increase, and it can increase very quickly. And that's what you don't want. The keys to reducing it, though, are centered around right ways to communicate, the correct ways to deliver information. You need to be able to communicate with your families, your teachers, your students, the people that need the information. And the important thing here is do not use the media as that vehicle for communication. Because once the media gets involved, they have the potential to create a disproportionate impact. And that's really a key here. There's a role for the media, and we'll talk about that. But at the same time, using them as a way and a vehicle to communicate is not the way to do it. Number one is they're not your friend. They're not capable of delivering your messages, and by you being able to deliver your messages just reduces that dot. The next question, though, is if you're going to deliver the messages, what are they? How do you manage that process? This slide depicts, typically of most schools and businesses that we deal with, and the green represents, what you know. As I mentioned earlier, what you know about your school, what your teachers and administrators know about what's going on, what your students share, what the community shares. The next piece is the smaller what you know you don't know. There's areas you don't know, and you're aware of that, and you understand, and hopefully you bring in a talent that you bring in lawyers when you need them, because that's not something you know. But the disproportionate side is, what you don't know, you don't know. What are the things that you're just unaware of, and you don't know if they're important or not? And that's the piece that's where mistakes start to happen. Hopefully when you need particular talent or you need information or expertise, you go get it. The problem is if you don't know, you start going down a road where you make decisions on the process, you make decisions on crisis, you make decisions on events that happen, and unfortunately you're just not prepared to deal with it. And a way to deal with that is to build a communications plan. As I mentioned in a few slides back, having that information and insight drives your intelligence. It allows you to make those proper decisions. Understanding what your threats are out around your school, monitoring the threats, and then being able to make decisions about those. So that's really the key in building that communications plan to be able to do it. A lot of the work we do here at Firestorm is building what we call predictive intelligence plans. And just first of all is saying, how do you know what's going on out there? What are the things that I don't know today that I really need to get my hands around? And that's really built around understanding the information that's there, collecting it, and being able to sort through it. The process we go through is we help schools identify, analyze information. We collect social media information. We're able to sort through it, and there's numbers of tools we do. But more importantly, it's not so much just collecting the information, but it's being able to sort through it and using the right keywords, using the right information streams to be able to get intelligence out of that information. That's the insight in building that plan. So part of our process with a lot of our clients and the schools we work with is building this model as part of their crisis communication plan. So it's not as simple as what do I say and whom do I say it, but first step is what are my risks? How can I build a network of information that drives data to me? So as an administrator or someone who's looking at the branding and trust of a school environment, that I can start to make proper decisions wrapped around it. Because again, out there's a lot goes on in that internet and drives that information back. There's two things on this slide I kind of want to point out. First one is I've taken crisis off and put on consequence management, and that's a little twist on the idea that the decisions you make in an event of a crisis or an event, the decisions you make when you collect information and realize you have a potential problem, start to drive consequences. When you make phone calls, when you involve people, each time there's a consequence to those decisions. And so you move from being a crisis manager to more of a consequence manager. And as I mentioned before, without having the data, we're all trained to do the jobs we do unfortunately, we're not trained to make decisions without information. But in a time of crisis, a couple of things will happen. Number one is you will generally be wrong in your decision-making process. The decisions you make, it was hard to be 100% right. You don't have all the data. Things are changing. It's a dynamic environment. The key is, by having a process in place, having a way to collect the right information and having a process to go through keeps those dominoes from falling. It keeps you helps you make better decisions. The little graph that's here is called an OODA graph, and it kind of is a way to think through this problem. It was developed during the Korean War. There was actually a Colonel Boyd, who was an ace in the Korean War. And in his squadron, he shot down more planes than any other pilot, actually all the pilots combined. And of course, the higher-ups looked at that and said, what are you doing? You've been trained the same as the others. You went through the same process that all of our other pilots had gone through. What makes you different? And he sat down and thought about what made him different. He said, the only difference between me is I make my decisions faster. I do it faster. And when they went through the process, they realized he had come to a conclusion through observation. He said the MiGs, the people, the other planes we fight, just are not as maneuverable. So when I decide to make a decision, they cannot keep up with me. And that allows me to change what I'm doing. They can't respond faster. It puts me in a position of control. And really was his idea was to observe what's going on, orient myself to what's happening, collect that data, decide what I'm going to do, and then act on it. Very simple. And then in his case, he realized the planes weren't as quick. They didn't have the capabilities. He could make decisions, and that put him in a position of control and became an ace. So that simple procedure of understanding what's happening, making a decision, acting on it, and then monitoring the results and then adjusting, very straightforward and in line with that OODA model. But the key here is, where do you get the information? What are the rules and engagement around deciding what to do? You can act once you have that information. The monitoring piece, where we help, and then adjust it. And that comes back to understanding that part of your crisis communication plan needs to have that information, insight, to give you the intelligence to make those decisions. There's my dog masquerading as a lion, and I think it depicts, as I said before, when you're asked to make decisions and how do you respond, what's your communication process, you need to have that in place, because out there on the internet, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of half-truths, a lot of it's a cupboard full of juicy tidbits that that people put out there, and a lot of times it's not even malicious. They just people write their opinions. It appears like fact, and people start to make decisions on it. So in your cases, how do you protect that brand when you've got those lions out there that kind of look the way they do, and can start to affect your school, your brand, filter down into your families and into your students? And a simple way is setting up a crisis communication plan, or the crisis communication approach. And we've found that in our experience, it sort of tends to be a three-step plan. Understanding who your audience is, what their concerns are, tailoring your message, focusing like a laser on what you're going to deliver given by who's your audience, and then keeping it simple, 3 key messages wrapped around. That puts you in a position of control, puts you in a position of awareness. It allows all of your team to be able to respond to questions in a simple format, and keeps a consistent message. And that's critical, because as I said before, if you think back to those dominoes, if people are saying the wrong things or people are going in different directions, those dominoes will fall, and you'll spend your time dealing with the consequence of the comments as opposed to the real issue. And it wraps around a couple of points here. First of all, knowing what's going on, being able to predict, helps with managing the consequence. Collecting the facts, the time, the source, are they verified? Then, putting in your action priorities, which is assign your follow-ups, assign people responsible, make sure they're completed. And as you collect that information, understanding what the consequences are, collecting the facts, keep asking a few questions about them. What do you know? If you know something, are you concerned about it? If so, what about? And that really starts that questioning process. Given you're concerned about something, what's the plan around it? How are you going to monitor it? Who's going to do it? How you're going to do it? And how do you communicate that back to the stakeholders, the people that need to know the information? And these steps follow that OODA model. These steps follow that process of Predict, Plan, Perform that you've heard us talk about before, and the crisis in a fundamental crisis management approach. A couple of the key things to remember, and this is a great guide to have in a handbook, and maybe summarize it for all of your people that would be involved on your crisis management team. Continually remember that the media is not there for the benefit of the students' parents. Communication with them will not help any of those stakeholders. You need to have as part of your plan your ability to communicate directly with your parents and your students, your staff, employees, the board members, and again, as I mentioned, not through the media. The information has to be directed to them because they're the ones that need it. You need to communicate to all the stakeholders, not just one or two, and have a line of communication to all of them. So as messages go out, you have to have someone that makes sure that they get to the families, get to the students, get to your faculty and staff. And also, communicate directly with authorities that may be there. One of the questions we often get in this particular situation is when there's an event is, what do I do? Media shows up, I have there. If there's first responders or authorities that are directly involved with the event, then they're the ones that are in control. At that point in time, they are the ones in control of the event. So if anyone is faced with the idea that I don't have the information, there's something happening with around my school environment, and there's first responders involved, then that is the answer. Direct the media to them. They're the ones that have the information. They're the ones that are in control at that time. You'll get back at the appropriate time and share the information with the media because you have to do that. But at your time, when you have the facts, in the meantime, your focus is on your students, your parents, your families, your staff, the stakeholders at your school. And again, as you build your crisis communication plan, remember, like preparedness, these messages are a continuous process. They evolve, and so depending on the circumstances, this combination may change a little bit. But the reality is, as you go through the process, you realize that having a communications plan that's set out, having these guidelines helps everyone in the organization. Key to any success is training and awareness. And on the left side of this slide talks about the behaviors, threatening behaviors that you as an administration have to be aware of, and your staff, the administration, have to be able to address. And as I mentioned earlier, is that these are the risks that you need to be able to collect this information on. If you see these behaviors, what do you do? One thing we find with many plans we review is every school is aware of these things and has, guidelines that these are not allowed. But unfortunately, one of the things that we don't see often is a process in place to say, okay, how do I communicate these? How do I deal with these if I see the incident? And Normally it is just take it to the administration, but that's not sometimes A, possible, B, may not be the best solution. So the key is, given these behaviors, what's the messaging to your students and to your faculty to say, if you see this, here's where you take it to be addressed. Here's the process we have as part of our response plan, and the communication mechanism is laid out. Again, on the right side, the behaviors of concern. Training your staff and people on these behaviors allows them to be able to respond to these. If they see things, what do we do? How do we do it? So again, it comes back to, we're all aware these are wrong, but how do we collect this information? How do we get it to the right people? That process needs to be really refined and as part of that communications plan, and continually trained. So if any of these events happen, people know where to respond and how to respond. And I'll give you a kind of an example of this. This is a standard response protocol that we would put together for many schools. And as you can see, it's laid out in that fashion. If there's an event on the left side, here's what the definition of that event is. Here's the conditions of actions, and there's the directive. That's what we say. Here's what you do. So part of your communication plan is very, very simple. Event happens, here's the steps you take, and then here's the actions behind it. So everyone knows, if there's a lockdown, here's what you do. If it needs to be shelter in place, here's what you do, and here's the messaging. So jumping back to that last slide that I just talked about, those behaviors of concern, those behaviors you would see. What are your conditions for actions? What are your directive when you see them? Maybe very similar from a lot of them, but without having them detailed and without having a few steps in an action plan, that actionable intelligence won't be delivered to you. And this gives the guidelines, and this gives the directive for your team to be able to respond. Very quickly, again, this just depicts that whole process. If an incident happens, this is typically what happens. Teachers, advisors are touched first, or an adult, and the information is provided. It can be escalated to the head of school. It can be escalated to a threat assessment team, depending on the guidelines of what happens. All of this information should be clearly laid out in a student handbook, clearly laid out in the response handbook as part of that continuity or continuity of operations plan. But more importantly, and our key today is, what is that communication step? As you escalate it through, what are the steps? What are the protocols? What are the pieces of information that have to be tapped so that information flows smoothly through that process? And that goes back to 3 messages. It goes back to having a communications plan that's defined clearly. Again, just another example, and we can take a very quick look at the bottom. On the left-hand side, those criteria, the last one, communications effectiveness. This is a sample of where you are, and it gives you kind of an interesting point of reference. So if you look at your environment and say, hey, we've analyzed our environment, we've looked at our school environment, and we say we're a stage 2. We have some messages developed, the channels, we know where things are, but it's maybe not being practiced as well as we can. It's not being tested as well. And then your question is, how do we get to a stage 3 and a stage 4? So in all those areas, this is an example of moving through that maturity model, but today we're talking a little bit about the communications effectiveness. So this puts you in a position of looking at that and saying, where am I, and how do I, step by step? And that's part of the process we help some schools with, is define where they are and help them understand what are the steps to take in creating a communications plan that is both effective and can be tested and can be administered easily throughout the school. So your next steps, I'm going to jump over here because I realize that I've taken those 2 slides. Your next steps in this process, very simply, using the Firestorm model, and if you've been on presentation before, you've kind of heard this process of Predict.Plan.Perform is our methodology and how we view the process. Establishing an intelligence network is one step, and it goes back to saying there may be information out there today that's not favorable. If a crisis or an event happens at your school, there's definitely going to be commentary. There's going to be information out there. How do you collect it? How do you understand what's being said? More importantly, even if there isn't anything going on, what's being said by the students and the faculty and staff? And your families being able to collect that information, and more importantly, being able to put it into a format that you can make decisions on. Second thing is awareness and prevention training, which allows you to say, we're collecting this information. If we've created a crisis communication plans, we have an escalation plan in place, given an event, then making sure that the teachers and staff and your board of trustees, important, knows what that escalation process is and knows that as they receive information and as they get involved with activity, if that's the case, they know where it's coming from. They know the process it's been vetted before it might get to them, and they can trust that it's the best information and decision-making process that can be put in place. Then security assessment is always important in any school, in creating it as part of your preparedness plan. In developing the plan as part of your crisis response, you need that communications plan as well, defining those communication pathways so that as collected, it can get to the right people. And it also helps you as you have to start communicating back to your constituents in your school. You know what to say. Message maps are also critical, and if you're not familiar with the term, simply it's writing these predefined messages. And if you think back to the slide on that we talked about, the maturity model, one of the last areas is having developed message maps. So, the simple ones, if there's a school day, here's a message. If there's a, those are the simplest forms, but if there's an event happens, lockdowns, lockouts, evacuations, what's the messages to the parents? How do you communicate that event to them? Having those predetermined makes a big difference in expediency. So you're not trying to write them, you're not trying to create them on the fly. If the people that have to make those decisions aren't around, then someone who maybe doesn't do it all the time can respond with those messages quickly. And having them in place is vitally important, because the wrong message creates that confusion. The wrong message can create the consequence management issue. Then you spend your time dealing with the message and the consequence of the message as opposed to the issue itself. And then testing, performing. You do fire drills; those are just common. They're part of your behavior, and there's things you do all the time. They're part of what you do in running the school. But we can't say enough about training and making sure that people understand the plan and how to respond to it. We also have a behaviors of concern user group as part of it's on our website. If you go on the website, you can take a peek at it, and it might be something you would like to join, because it's a great way to exchange information, exchange ideas, and that's part of that training process as part of the next steps. And finally, we always write a short brief on this, which takes this information and brings it back to a summary, so you can access via the web. Talk to Ryan; he can get you copies of it as well, and then please share it with your staff, share it with anyone who you feel might find it interesting. And finally, that information can be invaluable to your team. And also, I would suggest there's a lot of other white papers and pieces of information on our website that may also be very helpful to you and to the and to your staff. Ryan, I don't know if there's any questions or commentary you might have.
Blair, this is Karen. Thank you
Karen?
so much. Hi. Thank you so much. We are right at our end point. I want to thank you for a great presentation, and I'm stealing the picture of your dog to use in a blog post. I think it's an awesome picture.
That's Shelby that's Shelby the half husky, half golden dog. So,
awesome.
Yeah,
well,
and I do apologize. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. If you do have any questions, please email us at webinars@firestorm.com. Again, you can go to firestorm.com/briefs, and you can see recordings of all previous sessions and download briefs and papers of thought leadership of Firestorm. That is it for today. We appreciate your time. Ryan, thanks so much for being on the call. Bill, for moderating as usual. And everybody, have a great day. This will end our call for today.
Thank you. Bye now.